Welcome, welcome, welcome to Kingdom Patterns for Business. I am Prophet Dwight Taylor, and I want to welcome you this evening. I have a question for you. Have you ever felt as though the walls were closing in on you and doom was inevitable, failure was inevitable, catastrophe was inevitable? You ever felt like that? Right? The idea that you thought was going to be the big explosive idea fell flat. The client that you knew was a sure thing has ended their contract with you. The business that you knew was going to take off like a rocket ship is more like a sputter. Ever felt like that? Well, if you have, that's what I want to talk to you about today. I'm giving today's message the title Journey versus Jeopardy. Jeopardy. Journey versus Jeopardy. Before I get into what I want to share with you today, do me a favor, head over to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/@ Kingdom Patterns. YouTube /@ Kingdom Patterns. Smash the bell, like the video, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you know when we're on live. Once again, that's youtube.com /@ Kingdom Patterns. Have you ever felt like the walls were closing in? I have. And today's broadcast, I'm going to share a story, not of my own story. I'm going to share a story of a character in the Bible, a man that whose life and whose experience and whose story I'm very fond of, and sometimes can even identify with. It's King David. Ever heard about King David? Know anything about King David? Okay. Well, I'm going to share a bit of history briefly, not too much, and then we'll look at a verse. All right. Um, so King David was we are introduced to his character as a shepherd boy, right? We are introduced to him as a son of a father, and his father has multiple sons, and David is one of them. But David is among the sons who, and his responsibility is to keep the sheep. Uh, God, long story short, God raises up a king because his people, the Israelites, have asked for a king. So God appoints a king. That king disappoints God, disobeys God, and so God, uh, you know, decides to raise up a king in his place. And the guy that God appoints as the replacement for the first king of Israel is David, right? And at the time that he appoints him, David is a shepherd boy. Jumping forward, after David gets anointed, what that essentially means is he's made aware that God has chosen him as the next king, but he's not ready to be king when he's anointed. So he has to go through the process of God shaping his character and him getting to know God and a bunch of things. All right. So the first time, or most the story that most people are familiar with, is after David has been chosen to be the next king. His father sends him to a battle that his older brothers are in with the first king. So they're in battle, and then there's this giant Goliath, right? The giant is threatening the nation of Israel. He is, standing over the nation. The whole army, the Israelite army, the Bible says, is afraid of this guy. He's a giant, 8, 9 feet tall, right? The Bible gives a detailed description of how large and heavy his armor is. And so David is asked to take some food to the front lines to where his brothers are and by his father, and to inquire on the well-being of his brothers. When David arrives at this battle, uh, it turns out David hears or sees the army of Israel, you know, kowtowing or backing away or in fear against this giant. And David, because he has spent his time getting to know the Lord as a shepherd in the field, he then decides to take on this giant. Now, this is the story of David and Goliath. All right. Okay. So David takes on Goliath. Long story short, he wins, cuts the head off of the giant, wins a phenomenal battle. So most people are familiar with David because of this battle, David and Goliath, right? Wins that battle. Today's title is Journey or Jeopardy. And I started by asking, have you ever felt like the walls were closing in? Well, guess what happens after David wins this monumental battle? He has a lot of other battles, but the king who has been replaced by David, although nobody except David and the prophet who anointed David knows that David is the next king, the current king begins to become jealous of David's military victories. Now, David is fighting on behalf of the king, right? But the king becomes jealous of David's military prowess and his victories. And the Bible makes it clear that this king, because of his jealousy, then sets out on a murderous rampage to kill the next king, David. Although so the king assumes David is coming after the throne. The truth of the matter is God appointed David. Remember, David was a shepherd. God appointed David the next king, but the current king, because he's disobeyed God and he's rapidly falling further and further away from his role as king, he's become a murderer. And the Bible says many other things about this guy, but that's not really what I want to focus on. What I want to focus on is the fact that because the sitting king is trying to kill David, that decision chases David out of the nation of Israel and into, watch this, don't miss this. David gets chased into the land of the Philistines. Now, the Philistines is the land where Goliath was their chief military force. So the giant that David slayed, because David is now running for his life from the sitting king who is in jealousy and from an evil heart trying to kill David, David runs to the Philistines, the very people who he slayed their number one weapon of mass destruction, right? He killed this guy and cut his head off. So David is living amongst the Philistines. And because it's been a span of time between the time David killed Goliath and the time that David is running from the current sitting king of Israel, the Philistines embrace him. The Bible actually says the king of the Philistines, Achish, when he recognizes that David is living on his land and amongst his people, the king thought to himself, well, this guy is a military superpower. He he is the guy who killed our weapon of mass destruction. He killed our number one soldier, right? He killed the guy that won most of our battles for us. And so if he's on my side, I'm gonna keep him for the rest of our lives. We're gonna keep him here. That's what the king thought to himself, right? Okay. Here we go. We're almost at this point where I'm going to show you this verse, and then I'm going to tell you why these couple of verses occurred. Okay. All right. And what David did in response, which, by the way, is what I want to share with you today. The title is Journey versus Jeopardy. Jeopardy. What does Jeopardy mean? It means misfortune. It means catastrophe. It means loss. Loss. It means a break. It means something that has been destroyed or something that is in peril. That's what jeopardy means, right? And the journey, of course, refers to the process that you've been in. If you feel like the walls are closing in, there's something you can do. And we're going to take a cue from what David did. Now, remember, David has been anointed the next king, but before he can sit on the throne, he has to be trained. And the current king is the king that's actually training David. Now, he's training him in a unique way by trying to kill him. But nevertheless, because David was a key warrior before the king chased him out of Israel, he was in the palace. He had the front row seat to how the kingdom ran and things of those natures. Now he's running for his life. And he's among the enemies of the nation of Israel, the nation where he has been appointed to be the next king. Okay, so watch these verses. So let's look at the verses now. Okay, the first verse says, and David was greatly distressed. Do you know what greatly distressed means? It means to be in a tight space, a straight space. The Hebrew behind the word distress means a straight or narrow space. It means like you feel like the walls are closing in. In other words, it's a picture or a mental image of things going wrong on every side. That's what distressed means. So David was greatly distressed because that's what the word for there, for the people spake of stoning him, because the soul of the people was grieved. Why was David's people the heart of his people? And when it says the people there, it's only talking about the men. Here's what happened. David was given a place by the king of the Philistines. Remember, the Philistines are the enemy of Israel. They're the army that Goliath belonged to. Remember David and Goliath. David killed Goliath and cut his head off. When he won that military victory, his uprising from that military victory caused the sitting king in Israel to get jealous and wanted to kill David. So he's on a murderous pursuit to kill David. And David has been running ever since that time. David now finds himself in the land of the Philistines, and the Philistine king gave him a parcel of land called Ziklag, Ziglag, Ziklag, right? Now, David is amongst the Philistines, and because the Philistines constantly fought with Israel, that's how David got his uprising, they're preparing to go to war again against Israel. But the military generals and the military commanders notice that David is living amongst the Philistines. So they go to the king and they tell the king, hey, listen, David cannot come to battle with us. If he comes to battle with us, he might, return to his love for his nation and then start fighting against us. He's going to kill us the same way he did Goliath. So they go to the king and complain about David. And so the king has to go to David and tell him, hey, listen, you can't come to battle with us. You and your troops going to have to leave the battle, right? So David and his troops go back to Ziklag. When they finally get to Ziklag, they discover that another raiding army has attacked Ziklag, burned Ziklag to the ground, and taken David's wives and the wives of all of his men and all of their stuff. We're talking about David is distressed. Why is he distressed? Well, he got back to Ziklag and realized that another raiding army took his wives and all of his stuff. How would that make you feel? Remember at the beginning of the broadcast, I said, your favorite client has closed the contract, a business idea you thought was going to flourish didn't work. What do you do when you feel like the walls are closing in? We're going to figure out what David did. So he gets back to his hometown. The hometown has been ravaged, burned, pillaged, plundered. There's nothing left. And it's so bad, the men are grieving for their wives and their possessions so bad that these are men that follow David of their own free will because, he's a military might. Remember, he killed Goliath, right? So they chose to follow David. But after this devastation, after this distress, after this jeopardy, right? After this thing, they're talking about killing David as though he did something wrong. When you feel like the walls are closing in, it can be it can be tempting to lash out at the people around you, to blame people. Okay? Which is what these men are thinking about doing to David. Now, the good news is they didn't stone David. But that's not really what I want to focus on. Remember, my title is Jeopardy, Journey versus the Jeopardy, or Journey versus Jeopardy. How do you handle when you feel like the walls are closing in? Let's look at the next verse. So David is distressed. His men are distressed, and they're talking about stoning him because of their grief. of loss, right? Okay, let's look at the next verse. Every man grieved for his sons and for his daughters. But look at what David did. David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. That's 1 Samuel 30 and 6. So 1 Samuel 27 to 1 Samuel 30 in the Bible, you can read the full story. What's important about this? Well, what's important about this is life is a series of ups and downs, no matter who you are. Life is a series of ups and downs. The question is, when the down times come, and they will come, what do you do? How do you handle it? See, it's not quite clear here what the Bible means when it says David encouraged himself in the Lord. And the reason it's not clear, you have to read the whole story. But I'm going to give you some highlights, okay? Remember, I told you David started, we are introduced to David as a shepherd boy. He's a shepherd. He's keeping sheep. Now, in America, we don't too much understand the life of a shepherd, but I'll give you some highlights. First off, you're in the field with the sheep for months at a time, not days, not hours, months. And the shepherd's job is to protect the sheep. They're defenseless animals, protect the sheep against predators. The Bible tells us that while David was shepherding his father's sheep, that both a lion and a bear at different times tried to come and take the young lambs, the lambs out of the flock. Right? They try to come and take the lambs. And the Bible tells us that David successfully preserved the life of the lamb from both a lion and a bear. So he learned warfare in the desert or in the field. He learned how to fight in the field. These are the muscles that he exercised when he came up against Goliath. And he learned who was protecting him in the field, which was God, right? If you come up against a lion, you come up against a bear, you come up against a giant, or you come up against a circumstance in your business or a circumstance in your life that's bigger than you need some help from somebody bigger than you. So David learned and cultivated his relationship with God while keeping the sheep and coming up against predators that wanted to decimate or wanted to distress the flock he was in charge of keeping. The Bible also says that David learned music while he was out there. So he not only learned how to war and how to fight and how to battle, he also learned how to worship. Think about it. You're alone, right? All of that time. And it's not all pleasant, right? Outside of just loneliness, aloneness, and feeling kind of sheepy because you only around sheep. Right? There's other challenges. So when it says that David encouraged himself in the Lord, he's well past his shepherding days. He hasn't been a shepherd of sheep. He hasn't dealt with sheep in many years at this point in his journey. But he also overcame Goliath. Watch this. The Bible also says that the first king, the one that disobeyed God, the one whose job, who has already been demoted, and the only reason he's sitting on the throne is because David's still in his process of becoming king material. The Bible says that guy received an evil spirit. Watch this. And the only thing that would give him relief from the evil spirit that the Bible says God sent against him for disobeying would be David playing his harp. I'm going through these things to communicate to you or suggest to you an alternative to focusing on the jeopardy or focusing on the thing that didn't go right or focusing on the valley. What David did was reflected on his journey. All of the success, his journey wasn't without incident, right? It wasn't without bad things, but he focused on the victories in the journey and how far God had brought him from a shepherd to now he's got 600 men. Although these 600 men currently want to kill him, he's still got 600 men. In other words, there's a bright side to every downside. The reason I entitled it Journey or Jeopardy is because Jeopardy always seems like the most important cataclysmic thing you should be focusing on. But the truth of the matter is, if it discourages you and if it stops you from moving forward, you probably shouldn't be focusing on that. It's probably better. And I'm not suggesting that you ignore it or that you act like it's not there or stick your head in the sand, but it's probably better for you and for your health and for your sanity to consider the journey and not just the current circumstance. Okay? That's what David did. David encouraged himself in the Lord. This battle or this event that has taken away my wives and taken away my goods, it's not good. But the God that I serve and the journey that I've been on tells me that it's possible for me to even be victorious right here. So guess what David did after he encouraged himself in the Lord? He called the priest, told them to bring him what is known as an ephod. Essentially, it's a garment of the priest, and it's how they would communicate with God. And then he asked God, hey, God, what should I do? My men want to kill me. I'm distressed. I'm not feeling too well. What should I do? And because God raised up David to be a warrior, do you know what God said to David? He told him, hey, listen, go get your stuff and your wives. The same God that protected you out there in that field with the lambs against a bear and a lion, I'm going to protect you against those who just burned and tried to pillage Ziklag. Go get it. The Bible says after this encounter, David went and got all of his stuff. Now, you felt like the walls are closing in. I have a question. Have you ever felt that way before? If you have, the question is, did you make it out of that time? Did you make it? It seemed like it was going to end you. This is the absolute end of me. Did you make it past that one before? If you made it past that one before, chances are you're going to make it again, even this time. So my encouragement is journey or Jeopardy. Don't focus on the Jeopardy. Don't ignore it, right? You got to be real about what's happening, but consider the journey. And in doing so, it puts you in a healthy space to handle the Jeopardy. Because again, life is full of ups and downs, peaks and valleys. The only question is, when the valley arrives, how do you handle it? Because the truth of the matter is, it feels like the walls are closing in on you, but they're not. Okay? All right. I'm Prophet Dwight. This is Kingdom Patterns for Business. Again, head over to our YouTube channel. Do us a favor, youtube.com/@ Kingdom Patterns. Give us a like for the video, right? Click the subscribe button and click that bell. Until next time.